Hey guys, tonight we're plunging deep into the wildest rulebook in history. The bizarre, baffling, and often slightly sticky world of Tudor England. Tonight, we're not just talking about Henry VIII's questionable beard choices or Elizabeth's forehead game. We're talking about the laws, customs, and social rules that made Tudor life more complicated than assembling IKEA furniture with your ex. So, before you get too comfortable, go ahead and like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And maybe drop a comment telling me what time it is and what pointless rule you'd bring back from history if you could. Seriously, someone out there probably wants to outlaw socks with sandals. Now, dim those lights, switch on your white noise machine, maybe tuck yourself in so tightly that even a Tudor sumptuary inspector couldn't complain about your bedclothes. Let's pause for a second. What if you could be fined for wearing clothes that look too expensive? Or if your weekend roast could land you in jail because it was the wrong day to eat meat? Imagine needing government permission just to paint your front door a certain color or risk a public flogging. Ever shouted at a bad driver? In Tudor England, speaking rudely to the wrong person could get your ears chopped off. And if you forgot to take your hat off in front of the wrong noble, that wasn't just rude, it was treason. Congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1553, smack in the middle of Tudor England. You're hungover on bad ale, you've lost your only spoon, and the local constable is suspiciously inspecting your socks. Good luck. If you thought fashion was just a matter of taste, welcome to Tudor England, where the colour of your hat could land you in jail. The sumptuary laws dictate exactly what you can wear, right down to your shoelaces. Forget expressing yourself. Your wardrobe is basically a legal document, and the penalty for velvet-based crimes is surprisingly steep. Let's set the scene. You wake up, stretch, and reach for your best shirt, except before you put it on, you need to check a literal scroll of government regulations. Will this wool tunic get you fined? Is your collar too wide? Are your shoelaces a suspiciously noble shade of blue? You're not getting dressed so much as prepping for a legal deposition. Welcome to your daily anxiety, wardrobe by committee, enforced by men with sticks. The rules were meant to make the class system obvious at a glance. Nobles wore silk, velvet, and actual gold thread. Merchants got plain but sturdy fabrics. Servants, labourers, and everyone else? Hope you like brown. Not sure about your status? Don't worry. The sumptuary laws were happy to remind you. Want to wear purple? Only if you're royalty. Want to wear satin? Better be an earl, or at least close enough to the queen that she won't care. Get caught wearing something above your station, and you might be fined, shamed, or forced to stand in the marketplace in your undergarments while your neighbours debate if you're more fool or fashion victim. It's a world where getting dressed is like playing a game of legal twister. You might be thinking, how would anyone know if my stockings are the wrong fabric? Well, Tudor England was full of people whose part-time job was snitching on their neighbours. Jealous cousin? Rival at the market? That one woman who thinks you look too fancy? All potential informants. The system ran on pettiness, suspicion, and the kind of fashion policing that would make Instagram comment sections look merciful. And the rules weren't just about colour. Buttons, embroidery, even the shape of your sleeves. Everything was regulated. Let's say you fancied a splash of colour, maybe a nice green doublet, just to spice up your week. Unfortunately, unless you had a title and the right property income, green might be illegal. The law sometimes changed yearly too, just to keep you guessing. You needed an accountant just to get dressed, and a lawyer to explain why your hat had feathers. Sometimes, even feathers had a hierarchy. Swan feathers for the wealthy, goose for the respectable, pigeon for those with very low expectations. Here's a helpful Tudor tip. If you're poor, just go for the beige and invisible look. Brown, grey, muddy. Congratulations, you're not breaking any laws, but you are blending into the background of every tapestry ever painted. Clothes weren't just expensive, they were a liability. If you were lucky, you owned 2 outfits. One for daily misery, one for Sunday best. which was really just slightly less stained. And if you outgrew your only legal tunic, well, good luck finding a replacement in the right shade. Why all these rules? Officially, to stop people from living above their station and to keep order. Unofficially, it was a way for the rich to keep everyone in their place and for the government to collect a little extra money from fines. It's like the HOA of history, but with more beheadings and fewer newsletters. So, as you tiptoe out the door, wrapped in legal brown and covered in the reassuring itch of honest wool, you see a noble ride-by in fur, gold, and a hat the size of a small dog. You nod, careful not to look too envious, and try not to step on your own forbidden shoelaces. Fashion in Tudor England was survival. And if you got it wrong, it wasn't just a faux pas, it was a crime. So next time you put on socks that don't match, just remember, at least you won't end up in court for it. The first meal of your Tudor day is a legal minefield. What you eat, when you eat, and who's allowed to eat with you are all regulated by unwritten rules. Hope you weren't dreaming of bacon, because that's for Sundays and saints. Everyone else is just praying their pottage doesn't contain last week's mystery meat. Let's set the breakfast table. If you're imagining golden eggs, sausages, and a fresh-baked croissant, slam that mental door shut. The Tudor breakfast is less brunch goals and more did I just chew on a twig. For most people, it's pottage, an ancient, bubbling cauldron of oats, peas, barley, random roots, and whatever else hasn't walked away yet. If you're lucky, there might be a chunk of old bread floating in there, the culinary equivalent of winning the lottery, except your prize is slightly less mouldy than usual. But even this sad stew comes with rules. During Lent and on certain fast days, which, if you're keeping score, happen roughly every time you get hungry, you're forbidden from eating meat, eggs, or dairy. That's right. Your morning already tastes like defeat, and now the church wants to make sure you suffer extra. Try sneaking in a forbidden rasher of bacon and your neighbour, who definitely saw you buy that suspiciously plump piglet last week, might just report you to the local constable. Enjoy your breakfast. It's being watched. Who you eat with matters too. The head of the household sits at the table's high end, which is Tudor speak for closest to the only warm spot in the house. Everyone else fans out in strict social order, right down to the household dog, who's mostly there to catch crumbs and judge your lack of table manners. Servants and apprentices, they wait their turn, eating the leftovers after you're done. And if you're a woman, breakfast comes with a double side of expectations. You're up first, cooking, serving, and making sure your husband's pottage is only mildly lumpy. Manners are their own legal system. You eat with a spoon if you have one, a knife if you're brave, and your hands if you've given up. Forks, by the way, exist, but using them is considered suspiciously foreign, the Tudor equivalent of texting at the dinner table. Wipe your hands on your tunic, but never on the tablecloth. And for heaven's sake, don't slurp. Slurping is French. We don't do French. If you're wealthy, breakfast means options. Rich Tudors might start the day with manchet, fine white bread, cheese, maybe a fried egg, and a cup of ale or weak beer. Yes, beer for breakfast, because the water will kill you faster than the pottage. And if you're truly posh, you can get away with extravagant things like imported marmalade, honey, or the kind of butter that isn't half candle wax. These luxuries, of course, come with their own legal strings attached. For example, white bread is only for the well-to-do. A peasant seen munching on manchet is liable to be accused of either theft, witchcraft, or acting above their station, which is the worst crime of all. For everyone else, hope you like horse bread, a mixture of beans, bran, and random grains originally made for actual horses, then repurposed for breakfast, because why waste anything? If you can eat it without chipping a tooth, congratulations. That's one more day with your medieval dental record intact. And let's not forget the ale. It's not the fun kind. Think of it as breakfast juice, only less nutritious and slightly more likely to contain a drowned fly. Children drink it, adults drink it, even the dog might get a sip if he's looking particularly dehydrated. It's weak, barely alcoholic, but safer than the water. which often comes with a complimentary dose of dysentery. Finally, the entire experience is wrapped in anxiety about food laws. Selling bread that's too light? That's illegal. Putting sawdust in your pottage to make it stretch? Against the rules. Trying to sell an egg on a Sunday? That's a whole scandal. If you're caught, expect to be fined, shamed, or have your breakfast confiscated in front of the whole village. So there you sit, spoon in hand, eyeing your bowl of bubbling uncertainty. Breakfast isn't just a meal. It's a tightrope walk between starvation, scandal, and the ever-present risk of breaking a law you didn't know existed. Bon appétit. But don't call it that out loud. It's suspiciously French. In Tudor England, a handshake can be a political statement, and bowing is basically a full-body workout. If you forget to remove your cap or curtsy deep enough, prepare for social exile, or at least a raised eyebrow from a man in a very silly hat. Let's set the scene. You're shuffling out your front door, determined to start the day without embarrassing yourself. The street is buzzing with neighbours, merchants, and that one guy who always seems to be watching, just waiting for someone to trip up on protocol. You spot your neighbour across the road. You nod politely, but wait, was that enough? Should you have bowed? Is she your social equal? Or was her cousin knighted for services to the Crown's turnip supply? Congratulations, you're already anxious, and you haven't even made it to the market yet. Bowing, you quickly learn, is not just an optional flourish. It's compulsory cardio. Men bow from the waist, women curtsy, children do whatever awkward mimicry they can manage without falling over. The deeper your bow or curtsy, the greater the respect you show, and the greater the risk you'll tip into a muddy puddle. Meeting someone of higher status, that's a full bend from the waist, and, if you're feeling extra obedient, a hat removal. Yes, even if it's raining, snowing, or your hair looks like you just fought a small weasel. Now, hats are a whole subgenre of etiquette. If you're wearing one, it's basically a mobile apology just waiting to happen. Enter a house, remove your cap, greet the town bailiff, off with the hat. Walk past the church, better tip it, just in case God's watching and keeping a spreadsheet. There's even a right way to hold your hat, by the brim, low to the side, never swinging it around like a distracted toddler. And if your hat has feathers, well, those come with their own rulebook, depending on your social rank and the local feather inspector. For women, the stakes are no lower. The correct curtsy involves a gentle bend of the knees, a slight dip of the head, and a graceful movement of the arms, as though you're about to accept an invisible basket of turnips. A curtsy that's too shallow marks you as disrespectful, too deep, and you risk making the other person nervous about your intentions, or possibly your balance. And don't forget to keep your eyes lowered, but not so much that you can't see if the family chicken has wandered into your path. Many a social disaster has been caused by a curtsy that ended in poultry. And then there's the handshake, which is less about greeting and more about starting negotiations. Handshakes are reserved for equals, business partners, and moments when you both agree not to mention the incident with the goat last Michaelmas. But don't squeeze too hard, that's aggressive. Too limp? Clearly you're plotting treason or have a contagious disease. If you're unsure, just default to the bow. At least if you overdo it, people will only think you're terribly polite or suffering from lower back pain. All of this means that simply walking down the street is an obstacle course of nodding, bowing, hat removing, curtsying, and, occasionally, elaborate hand gestures that would look suspiciously like jazz hands to modern eyes. One missed greeting, and you might find yourself the subject of town gossip. Did you see how Thomas barely nodded at Lady Twistleton? Absolute scandal, his poor mother. The irony, of course, is that nobody is ever quite sure what the exact rule is. Was it 3 bows for the mayor, or 2? Should you wait to be greeted first? Can you wave at your cousin if she's standing next to the Lord High Fishmonger? The answer is always the same. If you're not sure, do everything, bow, nod, smile, remove your hat, curtsy, and then pretend to admire a passing cloud until everyone leaves you alone. So as you move through your Tudor day, Just remember, every encounter is a potential social landmine. Play it safe. Keep your hat handy, your knees flexible, and your apologies ready. Because in Tudor England, the art of the greeting is less about being friendly and more about surviving public shame with your dignity, mostly intact. Think your morning breath is bad? In Tudor times, it could be considered a public menace. Hygiene wasn't just a personal choice, it was occasionally enforced by law. Spoiler, bathing less often was actually encouraged, and woe betide anyone who dumped their chamber pot in the wrong direction. Let's begin with a deep breath, if you dare. In Tudor England, the scent of the streets was something between open farmyard and public compost heap. You stumble out your front door into a fog of wood smoke, horse, and whatever's been fermenting in your neighbour's laundry. The bad news is, nobody has invented deodorant. The good news? Nobody expects you to smell like a daisy. In fact, if you're too clean, people start getting suspicious. Bathing, you see, was thought to be not only dangerous, but borderline heretical. The medical consensus, offered by a barber surgeon who also pulls teeth and probably sells pies, was that hot water opened your pores, making you vulnerable to disease, sin, or, worst of all, chilly drafts. A proper Tudor might have a bath once a month, if that. And even then, it was a production. Hauling water, heating it over a fire, and then getting in before anyone else had the chance. Families often shared bath water, so if you were the youngest child, you could expect to bob for bits of straw and someone else's mystery rash. When it came to teeth, the average Tudor solution was out of sight, out of mind. Toothbrushes, as we know them, hadn't really arrived yet. Most people swished their mouths with vinegar, chewed on twigs, or just let nature take its course. If you were rich, maybe you'd splurge on a rag and some ground sage. But for everyone else, the main goal was don't let your teeth kill you before the plague does. Toothache? That's what the local barber surgeon was for. His toolkit included pliers, prayers, and zero anesthesia. But the real excitement starts with the chamber pot. Forget flushing. In most Tudor homes, you relieved yourself into a humble pot, emptied, if you were considerate, outside, and if you weren't, out the nearest window. Laws tried to regulate this, requiring people to shout "Garde-lou" before tossing their liquid gold onto the street, but results were mixed. A hasty or sleepy toss meant your neighbours might wake up to more than the rooster, get caught dumping at the wrong hour, or from the wrong floor, and you might find yourself face to face with a ducking stool, the official punishment for public health menaces, scolds, and common annoyances. A few dips in the local pond, and suddenly everyone's following the rules, at least until next week. Public bathhouses did exist, but their reputation was less spa day and more unlicensed rave with extra boils. Eventually, church authorities decided these places were hotbeds for vice and disease, and most were shut down. If you wanted a proper wash, you did it at home, behind closed doors, preferably without witnesses, and definitely without too much enthusiasm. Clothes were washed even less often. Laundry day was rare, hauling water and scrubbing cloth by hand was backbreaking, and soap was expensive. Most people just layered on more clothes to mask the smell. Dirt, it turns out, was a kind of Tudor cologne. The government, not content with chaos, occasionally passed local ordinances to force some kind of order. Street sweepers were employed to shovel muck from the roads, and in London, laws required each householder to clean the area in front of their door. Of course, the best solution for most people was to sweep muck a few feet to the left, into the path of a less observant neighbour. Community spirit, Tudor style. So the next time you're dreading a morning shower or grumbling about flossing, remember, in Tudor England, hygiene was a balancing act between laziness, paranoia, and genuine legal peril. Smell too bad and you risk the ducking stool. Smell too good and someone might accuse you of witchcraft. Either way, it's probably safest to just stand upwind, keep your mouth shut, and hope nobody's emptying a chamber pot above your head. Walking to the market in Tudor England isn't so much a stroll as it is a dance of survival. The roads are chaos, full of livestock, beggars and carts. Oh, and those who dare to block the way risk fines, dirty looks, or stepping in something you'll never truly wash off. Start your journey by stepping out your door and immediately tripping over a sleeping pig. The pig, for the record, has more rights to the street than you do, especially if it belongs to a wealthy neighbour or a particularly stubborn widow. Chickens scatter underfoot. Geese honk with the kind of righteous fury that suggests they've been plotting against you all week. And somewhere nearby, a dog is already eyeing your shoelaces as if they're the highlight of his morning. You'd like to walk in a straight line, but Tudor streets are a kind of living obstacle course. There are carts piled high with turnips, children wielding sticks as imaginary swords, and grown men arguing about the price of onions right in the middle of the main thoroughfare. The road surface itself is a patchwork of mud, manure, and whatever fell off the last passing wagon. Potholes double as local ponds. After a good rain, just hope you remembered your wooden clogs, though honestly, nothing short of a boat will save your socks. Blocking traffic is a crime, by the way, and it's not a minor one. The town constable has nothing better to do than ticket people for standing too long in the street. If you stop to gossip, tie your shoes, or wrestle a particularly opinionated sheep out of the path, you risk a fine. The law says you're supposed to keep to the side, but since the side is often a muddy ditch or an open sewer, this is less about order and more about gambling with your dignity. Get caught in the act, and you'll get a stern talking to, or, worse, become the subject of local gossip for a fortnight. Social hierarchy determines everything, even who walks where. Nobles get the middle of the road. Merchants stick to the well-trodden lanes, and peasants are expected to squish themselves against the buildings, ideally blending into the scenery. Accidentally brush up against a lady's gown with your filthy sleeve, prepare for a lecture, a threat of legal action, and, if she's feeling generous, a public performance of disgusted sighing. You'll also need to watch for beggars, some with ingenious ways of parting you from your coins. One might lunge at your feet and demand a penny for footpath improvements. Another, more entrepreneurial, may set up shop at a particularly muddy crossing, offering to escort you across for a small fee, though there's a good chance you'll just be handed to the next beggar in the relay and end up exactly where you started. Let's not forget the carts, horse-drawn, ox-drawn, or dragged by very determined children. These wooden death traps careen through the streets with no brakes and even less concern for pedestrian safety. There are laws requiring carts to yield to noble riders, but to everyone else, best of luck. You can always try waving your arms and shouting, but the only thing you're guaranteed to attract is a spray of suspiciously warm street water. Oh, and then there's the ever-present danger above. Chamber pots. Remember, any open window could become a waterfall at a moment's notice. It's good manners for the pot emptier to shout Gardilou as a warning. But let's just say, not everyone is diligent. Sometimes the first hint you get is a cold splash, followed by peals of laughter and the smug knowledge that tomorrow it might be your turn. By the time you reach the market, you'll have sidestepped livestock, children, carts, mud, and possibly a rolling wheel of cheese on a rogue adventure. Your shoes are heavier, your dignity lighter, and you're convinced that walking in Tudor England should qualify as an Olympic sport. So, next time you complain about city sidewalks or slow walkers at the mall, remember, in Tudor England, the real challenge was getting anywhere with your shoes and your reputation still intact. Watch your step. It's 4 p.m. You're 3 ales deep and the local constable is watching. Public drunkenness is officially frowned upon, but unofficially expected. The trick is not to get caught, unless, of course, it's alehouse inspection day, in which case the real crime is not buying the inspector around. Let's be clear. In Tudor England, ale is life. Water is a gamble with dysentery, but ale, blessed, low alcohol, surprisingly nutritious ale, flows from breakfast to bedtime. The village alehouse isn't just the local watering hole, it's the social hub, town square, news network, confessional, and place to hide from your in-laws, all rolled into one. Everyone is here. Old men telling stories for the 10th time, mothers rocking babies under the table, and the town jester, who is just a farmer with one too many opinions and a loose relationship with the truth. Drinking, however, comes with a legal catch. While it's perfectly normal to have a jug or two, or four, of ale with your mates, actually being drunk in public is an offence. The law says you should be orderly and of good conversation. The reality is, as long as you can make it home without starting a fist fight, serenading the mayor's wife, or falling headfirst into the duck pond, you're in the clear. If you do get caught weaving your way home or yelling poetry at a pig, expect a fine, a night in the stocks, or, if you're unlucky, a very embarrassing entry in the town records. Alehouse rules are many and mysterious. There's the official ale taster, whose job is to ensure that the brew is up to standard. Spoiler, the standard is not poisonous mostly. The ale taster is both feared and envied, as he has the power to shut down an establishment, but also to demand endless free samples in the name of quality control. If he's in a bad mood, your best bet is to flatter him, offer a fresh tankard, and quietly hope he's lost his sense of taste since last Tuesday. There's also the unwritten code of the regulars. Always greet the landlord first. Failure to do so may earn you a mug full of what passes for cleaning water. Never sit in old John's chair unless you're prepared to arm wrestle for it. And if the local musicians start up, you're expected to clap, sing, and pretend you know all the words, even if the lyrics change every verse. Nothing ruins an alehouse evening faster than being branded the mirth killer. Let's not forget the alewife, the formidable woman who actually runs the place. She is judge, jury, and enforcer, with a wooden spoon and a glare that could wilt a turnip. Disrespect her, and you'll find your ale watered, your tab doubled, and your reputation battered. Praise her pie, and she might let you stay after closing for the last dregs, assuming you help sweep the floor and swear never to mention the secret ingredient. Spoiler, it's always lard. The law, meanwhile, is a shifting beast. On festival days, the constable is conveniently less observant, and the whole village might end up merrily staggering down the street together, arm in arm, singing about things best left forgotten. But on inspection day, when the magistrate is in town, everyone suddenly remembers how to sit up straight, speak softly, and claim they've been drinking small beer all along. The constable, who knows exactly how many times you've fallen off your stool this week, just shrugs and takes his complimentary pint, justice, Tudor style. By evening, as candles gutter and the singing gets rowdier, you realize that public drunkenness is a matter of timing, skill, and luck. Too much and you'll regret it. Too little, and you'll miss all the good stories. Just enough, and you might make it home with your dignity, your hat, and maybe even a pie for breakfast. So next time you raise a glass, remember, in Tudor England, the alehouse isn't just about getting tipsy. It's about surviving the rules, dodging the fines, and never, ever underestimating the alewife's left hook. Cheers. Tudor markets are where order goes to die. Prices are fixed by law, haggling is practically a blood sport, and if you try to sell a turnip that looks at someone funny, expect a visit from the official turnip inspector. It's capitalism, but with more chickens. Picture yourself elbow deep in a sea of humanity before you've even had your breakfast ale. The noise is staggering. Vendors hawking, children shrieking, a goose choir performing its own version of ye olde greatest hits. Every sense is under assault: garlic, fish, new leather, and the unmistakable perfume of a pig that's had a long morning and no regrets. You approach the cheese stall, feeling equal parts hopeful and afraid. The law says that food prices must be fair, which is a Tudor way of saying whatever the local alderman feels like today. The cheese merchant, Mrs. Butterwicks, is a formidable figure with forearms like hams and a smile that signals she knows you can't afford the cheddar. She informs you that the price is fixed, but that haggling is encouraged for the sake of tradition. This is a trap, by the way. If you haggle too much, you'll be branded a miser and risk the wrath of Mrs. Butterwicks and her extended family, all of whom seem to be lurking behind the stall just in case. Try to get a deal on anything, and suddenly the market reeve. Imagine a combination of traffic warden, referee, and nosy neighbour appears. The reeve is armed with a set of scales, a measuring stick, and a deep suspicion of everyone. Try to sell underweight bread? He'll spot it from 50 paces. Water down your milk? He'll sniff it, then call witnesses. If your cheese is too small, too large, or too lumpy, you may be summoned for a public cheese inquest, a humiliating spectacle involving a lot of pointing, shouting, and the ceremonial dropping of suspect cheese into a bucket of water to see if it floats. If it sinks, you're innocent. Unless, of course, the reeve's brother-in-law owns the rival cheese stall. Don't even think about undercutting your competition. Market law says everyone must stick to the official price, and breaking it is a one-way ticket to being pelted with root vegetables or forced to pay a fine large enough to make you rethink your life choices. Worse, word will spread, and you'll become that cheese cheat, haunted forever by whispers of mouldy scandal. Meanwhile, the crowd flows around you in unpredictable tides. Someone steps on your foot. A chicken makes a break for it, pursued by 3 children and an apprentice baker wielding a rolling pin. You narrowly dodge a bucket of eels, only to collide with a neighbour's wheelbarrow full of suspiciously large radishes. Market day is part gladiator pit, part soap opera. Oh, and every so often, the entire affair screeches to a halt for the arrival of an official, the turnip inspector, or sometimes the ale taster. These dignitaries take their work very seriously. The turnip inspector will prod, sniff, and occasionally threaten your produce with exile if it doesn't measure up. The ale taster, meanwhile, has the enviable job of sampling every brew in the market, a task he manages with an air of both deep responsibility and profound tipsiness. Bartering is also rampant and rarely straightforward. Need eggs, but only have onions? Congratulations, you've just entered into a complex, 5-way negotiation involving a goat, 3 hanks of wool, and a promise not to say anything about last week's pie incident. Markets are where secrets, rumours, and marriage proposals are exchanged at a rate far exceeding that of any actual currency. By the time you've survived, you'll have lost a shoe, gained a turnip, and completely forgotten why you came in the first place. The cheese you finally walk away with? Slightly overpriced, possibly a little sweaty, and absolutely the best thing you'll taste all week. So, next time you complain about standing in line at the grocery store, just remember, at least no one's measuring your carrots with a suspicious glare or threatening you with a floating cheese trial. In the Tudor market, survival is an art, and sometimes a minor miracle. Forget elbows on the table. Using the wrong knife at a Tudor feast could get you socially executed. Dinner is a test of etiquette, nerves, and jaw strength. Don't forget, always wipe your hands on the tablecloth, never on your neighbour, and beware of pies that sing. Let's set the table. You walk into the great hall, ducking under banners and the suspicious gaze of 3 different portraits of the host's ancestors, each one silently judging your posture. The aroma is overwhelming. Roast meats, herbs, bread, and something mysterious from the far end of the table that might be either fish or a taxidermy experiment. Every seat is assigned, because in Tudor England, where you sit reveals everything about who you are, who you know, and whether you're allowed to cut your bread with the fancy knife. Etiquette is everything. You sit only when the head of the house sits, and you do not, under any circumstances, start nibbling before the first toast, usually delivered by someone with a title, a wig, and a dangerously wobbly goblet. The servants circulate with platters, and you pray you'll get more than a piece of boiled turnip, or whatever was left over from last week's pottage. The bravest guests tackle the singing pie, a real Tudor delicacy where live birds are baked into the pie crust and released at the table for the entertainment of all. Nothing says bon appetit like a startled starling in your soup. Now, utensils. Yes, forks exist, but using them marks you as suspiciously foreign. Spoons and knives are the tools of the day, preferably your own, brought from home and sheathed at your belt like a culinary sword. Using the wrong blade is a faux pas that could haunt your reputation for seasons to come. Cut your meat too aggressively, and you're labelled a brute. Slice too delicately, and you're clearly hiding noble blood or a guilty conscience. Drinks, ale, wine, or, if you're daring, mead, served in heavy mugs that double as self-defense in case of a sudden argument about who really owns the North Field. Toasts are frequent and enthusiastic. Forget to join in, and you're suspected of plotting treason or at least hiding a secret lentil. Overindulge, and the alewife will remember, forever. The tablecloth is not just a decorative flourish, it's your only hope for hand hygiene. Wipe your fingers discreetly, as blowing your nose on the tablecloth is strictly forbidden, even if Uncle Geoffrey seems to have missed the memo. Bread acts as both food and napkin. Just don't drop crumbs, or the family dog will take that as a challenge. If you're lucky enough to get meat, you must pass the platter in the correct direction. Pass left, not right, unless you're seated with a group of left-handed noblemen, in which case you're probably at the wrong feast. Under no circumstances should you lick your knife, nor on the bone, or, heaven forbid, stab your food. Those are all crimes against dinner, and may result in a stern talking to, a hefty fine, or being made to sit at the children's table next time, where, honestly, the conversation is usually better. Table talk is another minefield. Politics are risky, religion is even riskier, and anything about your host's new haircut is outright dangerous. Gossip is fine, as long as you keep it one scandal behind. Nobody wants to be accused of starting a rumour before dessert. When the feast ends, you stand only when the host stands, bow or curtsy at least twice, and hope you've survived without major incident. If you've made it through without dropping your spoon, drinking from the wrong cup, or getting pecked by a magpie, congratulations, you're practically nobility. So next time you eat dinner in front of Netflix, spare a thought for the Tudors. Their table was a stage, the audience unforgiving, and the dinner roll might just have been weaponized. Bon appetit. Owning a pet in Tudor England isn't just a lifestyle choice, it's a legal challenge. Dogs must be muzzled. Pigs need leashes. And if your rooster crows at the wrong hour, prepare for a stern letter from the Mayor's Office of Angry Neighbours. Let's start with dogs. If you're picturing a loyal golden retriever, think again. Most Tudor pets are there for a reason. Herding sheep, killing rats, or acting as your early warning system for tax collectors. But even these hard-working companions come with rules. In the cities, laws required dogs to be muzzled, especially during outbreaks of rabies, or as the Tudors called it, mad dog season. If your dog was caught unmuzzled, or worse, nipping at a neighbour's ankle, you could be fined, have your dog impounded, or forced to listen to a 3-hour sermon about civic responsibility. Tiny lapdogs, popular among the rich, were technically allowed to run free, but only if they wore the right sort of ribbon, proving their owner's status and the dog's total uselessness. Now, pigs. If you owned a pig, congratulations. You had what passed for a mobile savings account, central heating, and an organic waste disposal unit, all in one. Unfortunately, so did most of your neighbours, which is why Tudor towns were filled with roaming porkers snuffling through garbage, rooting in flower beds, and occasionally terrorising local shopkeepers. To keep chaos to a minimum, and flower beds intact, laws required all pigs in town to wear a nose ring and be led on a leash, preferably by someone strong enough to stop them when they got distracted by something smelly, which, in Tudor England, was everything. Fail to leash your pig, and you risked more than dirty looks. The town swineherd could confiscate your pig and charge you for its release, a medieval version of paying bail for your four-legged delinquent. Repeat offenders could see their pigs carted off to the Lord Mayor's pig pound, where the creatures would await trial, their fate determined by a panel of grumpy aldermen and one extremely bored clerk. Roosters were another source of municipal mayhem. Roosters are not, by nature, considerate neighbours, and Tudor authorities had rules about when and how often they could crow. A rooster that woke the mayor before sunrise could earn you a fine, a visit from the local constable, or a place of honor on the village's most hated residents list. Right below the man who never returned borrowed wheelbarrows. Chronic crowing could even get your rooster banned from town, which was awkward for everyone involved. Cats, meanwhile, were tolerated for their mouse-hunting abilities, but looked upon with deep suspicion, especially if they were black or liked to hang around old women with mysterious gardens. Owning too many cats was a one-way ticket to being labelled a witch, or at least unsettling. Dogs fetched sticks, cats fetched gossip and accusations of sorcery. Even working animals were regulated. Horses had to be properly stabled, and if yours was caught wandering the high street, you could expect a fine and a sarcastic comment about your horsemanship from the local reeve. Cows and sheep grazing in the wrong field led to long, angry letters written in legal Latin, most of which boiled down to control your animals, or else. And then there were exotic pets. Occasionally, a wealthy merchant might import a monkey, parrot, or even a tortoise to show off at dinner parties. These creatures needed special licenses, and, in one famous case, an official proclamation when a monkey was found drinking ale and playing dice at a tavern. True story, the monkey won. Animal-related laws weren't just about public order, they were about showing you knew your place. Rich people could have peacocks and ponies, poor folks had pigs and problems. Breaking the rules wasn't just a nuisance, it was a social statement, and sometimes an expensive one. So next time your neighbour complains about your barking dog, just remember, at least you don't need to buy a leash for your pig, muzzle your chicken, or worry about your cat being put on trial for witchcraft. Tudor England, where every animal came with a footnote, and every footnote probably ended in a fine. The Tudors took bedtime seriously, so seriously, in fact, that you can be fined for lighting a candle after curfew. If you're caught reading after dark, expect a tax, a scolding, and possibly a visit from the official snuffer. Let's paint the scene. The sun dips behind the rooftops, painting everything with that classic Tudor glow, muddy streets, smoky chimneys, and the gentle sound of your neighbour trying to corral their pig home for the night. At the stroke of 9, maybe 10, if you're lucky, the town crier shuffles down the street in his finest hat, ringing his bell and bellowing, "Lights out! Curfew!" This isn't a suggestion, it's a royal command, and every householder is expected to snuff out their candles, bank the hearth, and tuck themselves into bed as if the king himself might pop by to check. Now, why such early nights? For one thing, candles were not cheap. A single beeswax candle cost more than a day's wages for most, and even the humble tallow candle, made from animal fat, smelled like burning regret and turned your walls a tasteful shade of brown. Keeping a candle burning after curfew wasn't just suspicious, it was extravagant. The Crown, always looking for creative new ways to collect money, instituted an actual candle tax. If you wanted to stay up past bedtime, you needed to pay up. No one wanted to explain to the tax collector why they'd been caught reading after hours, especially if the book was on the suspiciously educational list. And the official snuffer? Yes, that was a real job. One unlucky soul tasked with patrolling the streets and peering in windows to catch rule breakers mid-chapter. Get caught with an illicit candle, and you'd receive a lecture about fire safety, a fine, and perhaps a little public shaming for good measure. Repeat offenders could even lose their precious candle rations, forcing them to rely on moonlight, neighbourly gossip, or the faint glow of their own burning embarrassment. Curfew wasn't just about saving wax or collecting taxes, it was about control. Nighttime was when mischief makers, trouble starters, and anyone with enough free time to plot rebellion liked to meet. The government figured that the best way to prevent crime was to make sure everyone was in bed, preferably snoring. If you were caught outside after curfew, you were assumed to be up to no good, possibly a thief, a spy, or worst of all, someone from the next village over. Inside, bedtime was a complicated ritual. Parents hustled children into their shared straw beds, while adults tucked in with nightcaps and prayers. You didn't dare light another candle, not unless you enjoyed the scent of hot lard and the looming threat of a fine. Most evenings, you went to bed early not out of exhaustion, but because darkness forced you there. It's hard to gossip, sew, or even plot your neighbour's downfall in pitch blackness. Of course, people found ways to cheat the system. Some households kept secret caches of rushlights, homemade torches from reeds dipped in grease, hidden in bread ovens or behind loose stones in the hearth. A good rushlight would give you 15 minutes of shaky, flickering illumination, just enough to finish a bit of embroidery, whisper a scandalous secret, or check that your toes hadn't frozen off. Occasionally, rebellious souls would stay up late playing cards, reading forbidden pamphlets, or just basking in the soft, golden glow of their contraband candle. But the fear of the snuffer, the fines, and the rumours kept most people in line. After all, no one wanted to be labelled a midnight mischief maker. Reputation was everything in Tudor England, and you never knew who might be peeking through your shutters. So, as you snuggle under your blanket, give thanks for your bedside lamp and the lack of snuffers lurking in the hallway. In Tudor times, the price of one late-night page-turner could be a week's wages, a public scolding, and a house that smelled suspiciously of singed mutton. Sleep tight, and don't let the snuffer bite. No matter how late you were up arguing about turnips, you will be in church on Sunday morning. Absence is punishable by fines, public shaming, or worse, being mistaken for a closet Catholic. You'd better look alert during the sermon too. Nodding off is a risky move. Picture the scene. Sunday dawns grey and cold, and your entire household begins the weekly scramble. No one gets a lie in, not you, not your children, not even the family pig, who probably needs to be shut in the shed to prevent an embarrassing escape. Your only hope is to get dressed, somewhat clean, and arrive before the bell starts tolling. And don't even think about sneaking in the back. The church warden is watching, and he has the seating chart memorized. Attendance isn't optional. In Tudor England, church is the centerpiece of village life, a mandatory event where absence is as obvious as wearing velvet when you're a peasant. Miss too many services and you're slapped with a fine, usually a few pennies, but enough to sting. And if you're really unlucky, your absence will be read out loud from the pulpit, inviting a week's worth of side-eyes from your neighbours and whispers about your suspicious beliefs. Repeat offenders risk public penance, which means standing at the front of the church in a special shame sheet, or even a session in the stocks, where children are encouraged to throw stale bread and creative insults. Inside, the church is cold, draughty, and smells like old wood, incense, and a hint of sheep. Seating is strictly ranked. Gentry and bigwigs up front, everyone else crammed on uncomfortable benches or standing in the aisles. Don't even think about stealing a better spot. That's another rule. And a social crime that will get you uninvited from every future barn dance. The service itself is long. The priest drones on, alternating between scripture, royal decrees, and subtle reminders not to gossip, poach rabbits, or skip church. Your job is to look engaged, say amen at the right moments, and, above all, stay awake. Sleep, and you might be poked by the parish beadle, a man armed with a long stick specifically for this purpose. There's nothing like being whacked on the head with a brass knob to remind you of your spiritual duties. If you manage to survive without embarrassment, you're not out of the woods yet. Church is also where you pay your tithes, 1/10 of everything you own, from your best turnip to your last chicken egg. Try to skimp, and the church warden will pay you a visit, accompanied by a suspiciously large sack. Forget your tithe altogether, and you might find yourself the subject of a public prayer, requesting divine intervention for your forgetful soul. And then there's the all-seeing gaze of your neighbours. Church is the place to see and be seen, who's walking with whom, who's wearing new shoes, who's been crying, and who's trying desperately to hide a Saturday night black eye. The real sermon is delivered by the village gossips, who take mental notes on everyone's behaviour, ready to relay their findings over a Monday morning bucket of laundry. Finally, as the service ends and everyone files out, there's a gauntlet of handshakes, polite nods, and well-meaning questions about your health, your garden, and whether you've considered joining the church choir. Don't be surprised if the vicar corners you to remind you of the next holy day, or if your neighbour hints, not so subtly, that your singing could use more enthusiasm. By the time you get home, you're exhausted, slightly poorer, and already dreading next Sunday. But whatever you do, don't skip. Unless you fancy a fine public shame or rumours about your secret allegiance to Rome. In Tudor England, everyone makes it to church, even if they leave their dignity behind. Growing a beard in Tudor England is a political act. Beards of a certain length were taxed. Shaving could get you labelled as a radical. And woe to anyone caught with an unlicensed moustache. Yes, those were a thing. Let's face it, literally. In Tudor England, your chin was not just your business, it was the crown's business. Facial hair was more than a style choice. It was a statement, a tax category, and sometimes a minor crime scene. Every morning started with a choice. Do you shave and risk gossip, or let it grow and risk a visit from the local beard inspector? Yes, that was an actual job. Imagine trying to look intimidating while holding a ruler up to the town blacksmith's face. The rules, as always, depended on your status. Nobles set the fashion. If the king was sporting a beard, and at times Henry VIII's chin bristles were the talk of Europe, then all loyal subjects suddenly grew their own, hoping to win royal favour or, at the very least, avoid being accused of supporting France. But too much beard, and suddenly you were mistaken for a dissident, a Puritan, or worst of all, a philosopher. It didn't help that Tudor facial hair was governed by a tangle of ever-changing laws and royal whims. For much of Elizabeth I's reign, beards longer than 2 weeks' growth attracted a beard tax. The logic was simple. The longer your beard, the more money you must have to waste on razors, oils, and the sort of time-consuming grooming rituals only the wealthy could afford. To prove you'd paid your dues, you received an official beard token, essentially a receipt to hang on your person, and possibly your facial hair. Lose it, and you could face a fine or, worse, a public shaving by the local constable, whose experience with razors rarely extended beyond sheep. And don't get smug if you're clean-shaven. In certain circles, going bare-chinned was the mark of a troublemaker. Maybe you were a secret Catholic, a radical reformer, or just someone with a weak jawline. Either way, you risked being whispered about at the alehouse. Did you see Thomas? No beard. Probably writes poetry and has foreign ideas about dinner forks. Then there were the moustaches. Oh, the moustaches. Sporting a dramatic moustache without the proper paperwork, yes, really, could get you into hot water. Some cities required an upper lip license obtained from the local guild or bailiff. Without it, you were assumed to be impersonating a soldier, or worse, an actor. And we all know how people felt about actors. Exciting on stage, suspicious of it. Barbers, meanwhile, were the real power brokers of the face. Not only did they cut hair, pull teeth, and patch wounds, but they also served as unofficial beard consultants, keeping track of who was growing what and who might need a quiet warning about the latest law. If you didn't have a trusted barber, you'd better have a steady hand, or you'd risk uneven sideburns, an offence against both God and fashion. It wasn't just men under scrutiny. Women too faced their own follicular expectations. Eyebrows had to be shaped just so, thick enough to show virtue, thin enough not to suggest witchcraft. Pluck too much, and the village might wonder if you had something to hide. Don't pluck at all, and you'd be accused of sloth, or, worse, continental sensibilities. In the end, keeping your face legal was a daily dance of scissors, suspicion, and social signalling. One wrong move, and you were fined, shamed, or forced to listen to the vicar's sermon on the perils of vanity. If you're lucky, you'll escape with nothing worse than a patchy beard and a new understanding of why so many Tudor portraits look like the sitter is worried about being arrested mid-painting. So next time you admire your 5 o'clock shadow or contemplate a new style, remember, in Tudor England, your facial hair wasn't just a matter of taste. It was a matter of law, and the law always had a ruler ready. Thinking of eloping with the blacksmith's daughter? Not so fast. Tudor marriage is a paperwork adventure, and marrying without the proper license can get you both in serious trouble. Romeo and Juliet, but with more paperwork and fewer poetic deaths. First, forget spontaneous proposals. In Tudor England, romance is a multi-step process involving half the village and several legal documents. The church keeps meticulous records, and marriage is less about roses and more about property, alliances, and making sure no one's secretly French. The first step is publishing the banns, a public announcement of your intention to marry, read aloud during church services for 3 consecutive Sundays. This isn't just tradition. It's an early warning system for meddling neighbours. Anyone with a grudge or a hazy memory of you kissing the baker's apprentice can stand up and object. Did you once steal a turnip? Now is the time for the whole village to remember. Even after you've survived the bans, there's paperwork. If you're in a hurry, maybe you don't want to wait, or maybe someone is already knitting a suspiciously tiny pair of socks, you'll need a special marriage license. Getting one means trekking to the nearest bishop's office, explaining yourself in front of a clerk who's heard every excuse, and of course, paying a fee. The bishop wants to make sure you're not already married, closely related, or engaged in any heretical activity, like planning to wed without the proper paperwork. Social class complicates things even further. If you're a peasant, you need your lord's approval. If you're from a family of means, expect your parents to draft a contract, negotiate dowries, and make sure the in-laws won't try to claim your best cow. Sometimes, marriages are arranged while the couple is still in diapers, convenient if you like planning ahead, awkward if you grow up to hate each other's taste in hats. Secret marriages do happen, but they're a risky gamble. Getting caught marrying without a license or outside of church, say, under a romantic tree or in a barn, can mean hefty fines, annulment, or public penance. The priest may be forced to declare your union invalid, and you'll spend the next several Sundays standing in the church porch in a special shame smock, the Tudor version of a walk of shame, but with more mud and no one rooting for you on Instagram. The church's concern isn't just moral. Marriages outside official channels threaten property rights and inheritance laws, which means the crown could lose out on tax revenue. If you inherit land from your spouse, but your marriage isn't official, the property might revert to the local lord, or worse, the crown. The paperwork isn't just for fun. It's to make sure every sheep, spoon, and child ends up exactly where the authorities want them. Love matches are rare, but not impossible. Sometimes, a couple falls for each other and persuades their families, and the vicar, and the mayor, and probably the local turnip inspector, to give their blessing. When it works, there's music, dancing, and enough food to make the neighbours jealous for weeks. But even at the reception, rules abound. Who can toast whom, what colour the bride may wear, and whether the pies are legal. See the Great Pie Scandal. If anyone breaks out in spontaneous poetry, everyone pretends not to notice. It's safer that way. And if you ever find yourself longing for a secret midnight wedding, remember, Tudor towns are small. Gossip travels faster than the church bell, and the parish clerk's ink never dries. So, next time you think about eloping, spare a thought for the Tudor romantics. Their love stories might not have ended with poison or tragic duels, but they did have to survive the deadliest weapon of all, bureaucracy. Serving a pie with too little meat, or, God forbid, fake ingredients, was a punishable offence. Pie inspectors roamed the streets, seriously, and would not hesitate to take legal action against your soggy bottom. Let's be honest. In Tudor England, pies were more than dinner. They were a matter of public trust, national pride, and, if you happened to be a meat pastry enthusiast, a risky act of social defiance. If your pie was all crust and no filling, you weren't just disappointing your dinner guests, you were tempting fate and inviting a visit from the dreaded pie inspector. Yes, there was an actual job title for this. Imagine a person whose sole purpose in life is to investigate whether your mutton pie is hiding more mystery than meat. The ultimate undercover agent, except armed with a fork and a deep-seated suspicion of turnips. Pie law wasn't a joke. Strict statutes dictated the minimum amount of meat required per pie, and woe betide anyone who tried to pass off a pottage pie as the real thing. In some places, beef, lamb, or pork were the only acceptable fillings. If you dared use peacock, squirrel, or heaven help you, shoe leather disguised with a thick gravy, you could find yourself publicly shamed, fined, or even banned from market day for a month. The humiliation of missing market day could only be matched by the horror of explaining to your mother-in-law why your pie is suspiciously chewy. So, how did these rules work in practice? Picture yourself baking in a smoky Tudor kitchen, nervously eyeing the oven and trying to remember whether parsnips count as suitable bulk. You followed the recipe to the letter, or as close as you can get when half your flour is borrowed from the neighbour. But there's still the nagging fear. Is there enough meat? What if the inspector shows up just as you're slicing into your masterpiece? You imagine the scene. He strides in, flour-dusted and scowling, demanding a sample. He pokes, he prods, he weighs. Too much crust? Not enough filling? He scribbles your fate in a little leather-bound book. The punishments for a pie gone wrong ranged from mild to life-changing. Sometimes it was a small fine and a public apology. I, John the baker, do solemnly swear that I will never again attempt to pass off a carrot as a beef shank. Other times, your pie might be confiscated and fed to the pigs, a fate almost as bad as being fed to the pigs yourself. If you were a repeat offender, your name could end up on a list of suspect bakers, a scarlet letter for the carb-obsessed. Mothers would point you out to their children in the street. There goes the man who once sold a pie filled with turnip and regret. And don't think you can get clever and just serve a smaller pie. Size regulations were enforced too, with special pie tins issued by the guild. Using a counterfeit crust was considered an act of culinary fraud. Some bakers tried hiding surprises inside, small birds, coins, or the occasional frog, just to keep things lively. But if you failed to disclose your pie extras, you risked being labelled a food saboteur. No one wants to explain to the town bailiff why there's a live sparrow under the pastry. The upside? When you finally got a real Tudor pie, golden, fragrant, bursting with meat and just enough onions to ward off the village gossips, it was a thing of beauty. Pies brought people together, fed armies, and won royal favour. Just one good pie could boost your reputation for months. Get it wrong, though, and you'd be living down Peagate until the next plague came through. So, next time you pull a frozen pie out of the oven, thank your lucky stars you're not facing the scrutiny of a Tudor pie inspector. In the world of Old English baking, the only thing tougher than the crust was the law. Forget letting a curse word slip. Swearing in Tudor England could land you in the stocks. There were actual laws about which words could get you fined, and how much. Just hope nobody heard you mutter by God's wounds after stubbing your toe. It sounds like a joke, but it isn't. Your vocabulary was under government surveillance. Tudor England didn't just frown on bad language, it wrote entire statutes about it. There were profanity police, local officials tasked with listening for blasphemy and keeping meticulous records of who said what, when, and just how creative you got with your insults. It's like living with your grandma, your boss, and a court stenographer all at once. The most dangerous language wasn't what we might call a four-letter word. No, the worst offences were taking the Lord's name in vain. Expressions like by God's bones, by the Mass, or God's blood were seen as literal acts of sacrilege, mini-revolts against the divine order, just shouting zounds, a compression of God's wounds. After stepping on a rake could land you with a fine equivalent to a week's wages. And, depending on the mood of the magistrate, a session in the public stocks for good measure. Imagine explaining to your neighbours why you're perched on a wooden bench, pelted with stale turnips. I sneezed and accidentally damned myself. Not all swear words were created equal. The fines were carefully graded, with a menu of forbidden phrases and matching penalties. Mild exclamations might only cost you a penny or two, but repeated or especially imaginative outbursts were treated as evidence of a dangerously rebellious spirit. Blasphemers could find themselves pilloried, their heads and hands locked in a wooden frame for hours, while children and the deeply religious threw stale bread and helpful advice. Repent, Thomas, and mind your vowels next time. Of course, all this regulation led to a vibrant black market in euphemism. Tudors became experts at saying terrible things without technically breaking the rules. Instead of "by God's bones," people muttered "odds bodikins." God's teeth became zooks. If you ever wondered where British creativity with language began, look no further than a society desperate to insult its livestock without attracting a clergyman's wrath. Shakespeare himself got in on the act, inventing layers of insult and innuendo, so thick you could safely curse the Queen's horse in iambic pentameter. The Church and the State took swearing so seriously that repeat offenders were sometimes forced to do public penance. This might mean standing barefoot in the church porch, wearing a white smock, and loudly confessing your linguistic crimes. It's one thing to drop a curse in anger. It's quite another to recite your greatest hits in front of a congregation with nothing to do but judge your diction. For the especially unlucky, records of their foul mouth were kept for generations. Imagine your great-grandchildren reading about how you were fined for inventing "by all the devil's toenails" on a rainy Tuesday. But even with all these rules, life finds a way. Children picked up banned words from the docks and repeated them at home, earning a soap-flavoured lecture. Alehouses were hotbeds of creative profanity, with landlords pretending not to hear, unless, of course, the official swearing inspector was enjoying a pint at the next table. The nobility sometimes got away with more, protected by privilege and a generous interpretation of pious intent. If the local lord accidentally let fly during a tense moment of croquet, everyone agreed he must have meant by the saints all along. So next time you stub your toe and mutter something regrettable, be thankful that the only thing at risk is your dignity, and maybe a lecture from your cat. In Tudor England, your words weren't just wind, they were evidence, and the law was always listening. Mind your language. Want bacon? Too bad. The Church and the Crown decreed entire seasons without meat. If you're caught cheating, it's public humiliation and a fine. Expect a Lent where the only thing thinner than your patience is your soup. Let's set the scene. It's early spring in Tudor England. The weather is a swirling mixture of damp, cold, and a vague sense of regret. And Lent has arrived to make sure your remaining winter comforts are snatched away just when you need them most. 40 days and nights of culinary suffering await you. No meat, no dairy, no eggs, just the slow, watery death march of pottage and, if you're lucky, a herring that's already past its prime. Enforcing these fasting laws is serious business. Church wardens and local officials are on the prowl, making surprise visits and sniffing out any household where the smoke smells a little too much like bacon. If you're caught roasting so much as a suspiciously large radish, expect to be summoned to the church porch, where you'll confess your greasy sins in front of your fasting, resentful neighbours. Rumours run wild. I heard old Mrs. Barton had chicken broth on the third Tuesday of Lent. Suddenly, she's the talk of the village, and everyone's secretly wondering how much she'd charge for a taste. Of course, the rules are complicated. This is Tudor England, after all. Some days you can eat fish. Some days only certain types of fish. And if you're important enough, or just friends with the vicar, there's a handy list of loopholes involving barnacle geese and beaver tails. Yes, you read that right. The Tudors classified barnacle geese and beavers as fish because they lived in water and, more importantly, everyone was desperate for anything resembling flavour. Beaver tail. It's what's for dinner. The Sunday roast, a staple of the English soul, becomes a distant, meaty memory. Instead, you and your family are crowded around a bowl of something that started as lentils and ended as pure resentment. Bread, stripped of butter and eggs, turns hard and humourless. The only fat you see is in the sermons about resisting temptation. The local ale is thinner, the cheese is forbidden, and everyone is watching each other for signs of illicit bacon breath. Temptation is everywhere. The marketplace is a minefield. Stallholders whisper about secret pies, salted hams, and the occasional black market sausage. The risks are high, but so is the reward. One bite of forbidden pork is enough to make you feel both heroic and hunted. Some households grow creative, stuffing vegetables with fish, inventing new forms of herring pudding, and brewing Lent-friendly small beer so weak that even the family goat won't touch it. If you're caught, justice is swift and inventive. Public penance might involve wearing a special garment, sitting on the sinner's bench, or, for the especially gluttonous, being forced to parade a suspiciously plump chicken through the market while loudly proclaiming your love of fish. Fines are levied, gossip flourishes, and your household's reputation for piety takes a nosedive. The nobility, as usual, bend the rules. If you're rich, you can afford loopholes, imported fish, medicinal meat broth, or a convenient letter from a bishop excusing you on grounds of delicate health, also known as wealth. For everyone else, Lent is endurance, ingenuity, and a lot of staring longingly at chickens. Eventually, Easter dawns. Bells ring, feasts return, and the smell of roasting meat fills the air as every pent-up appetite explodes at once. The pious thank God, the rest thank the pig. Until next year, when Lent returns with all its culinary vengeance. So next time you consider skipping breakfast, remember the Tudors, 40 days of public fasting, creative cheating, and soup so thin you could read your sins through it. Bon appétit, if you dare. The streets are filled with undeserving poor. And Tudor law had categories for every flavour of beggar, rogue, or vagrant. Step out of line and you could find yourself branded, whipped, or packed off to the nearest workhouse, no questions asked. Let's take a stroll down the high street. You haven't walked 10 paces before you're accosted by a one-eyed Abraham man, rattling a wooden cup and mumbling about the time he lost his foot. Don't look too closely at the suspiciously attached foot-shaped bundle under his cloak. A few feet later, a clappergudgeon limps by, theatrically waving a bandaged arm and reciting poetry for pennies. If you think the performances are a bit theatrical, you're right. There were actual guidebooks for beggars, listing the best sob stories and how to fake a convincing limp. In Tudor England, acting wasn't just for the theatre, it was an essential street survival skill. Of course, the authorities kept meticulous records of who was begging, why, and for how long. There were licensed beggars, usually the old, the sick, or those with a genuinely bad roll of life's dice. These unfortunates received a badge or a paper permit from the parish, allowing them to legally rattle their cups. Everyone else, the able-bodied, the suspiciously healthy, or those with too much flair, were labelled sturdy beggars, vagabonds, or masterless men, and treated with barely concealed contempt. Tudor lawmakers believed poverty needed to be managed, not pitied. They classified the poor as either deserving, quiet, grateful, preferably tragic, or undeserving, rowdy, able-bodied, or caught napping in a hayloft that didn't belong to them. Laws like the Vagabonds Act of 1572 listed over 20 types of rogue, from the ruffler, an ex-soldier with a fondness for threats, to the counterfeit crank, a fake epileptic who foamed at the mouth using soap shavings. The punishments? Severe and creative. If you were caught begging without a license, you could be publicly whipped, branded with a hot iron, a V for vagrant, which, in terms of social networking, is even worse than being banned from the alehouse, or marched to the nearest parish boundary with orders never to return. Some unlucky souls were pressed into forced labour at the local workhouse, breaking rocks, spinning wool, or learning that there is such a thing as too much gruel. Still, beggars and rogues were a fact of Tudor life, and many towns tolerated their presence with a mix of fear, pity, and exasperation. Locals might slip a penny to a favourite street performer, or secretly leave bread for the old woman who told fortunes by the market cross. But woe to any vagrant caught stealing, fighting, or, God forbid, running a con on a Sunday. Sundays were reserved for church, penance, and the local constable polishing his branding iron. Children, too, were swept up in the system. Idle youth could be seized and apprenticed out to farmers or tradesmen who were expected to turn them into useful members of society, or, failing that, at least keep them out of the taverns. Sometimes these kids ran away, joining the roaming bands of Egyptians, early slang for Roma people, fortune-tellers, and other outsiders who moved from town to town, always one step ahead of the law and the nearest angry landowner. So, next time you drop a coin in a cup or dodge a street performer, remember, in Tudor England, begging wasn't just a job, it was a hazardous career path with its own rules, costumes, and risks. One wrong move, and you could go from masterless man to marked rogue overnight. And if you found yourself on the wrong side of the law, let's just say there were no appeal forms, just a long road and a sore backside. Thinking of a career change? You'd better check with the guild first. Every job comes with a rule book thicker than the bread. Apprentices could be punished for sleeping in, whistling, or daring to look too cheerful. Let's say you fancy a new profession. Maybe you've had it with pig herding, or you're ready to swap the glamorous world of dung sweeping for the cutthroat life of a candlemaker. First stop, the guild. These are not just trade unions, they're medieval megaclubs with secret handshakes, fierce loyalty, and a love of bylaws that borders on obsession. The guilds control everything: who gets to work, who can own a shop, and most importantly, who gets to wear the really impressive hat. To become a master, you start as an apprentice. This means at least 7 years of learning, starting as a fresh-faced youth and ending as someone who's seen more cheese mold than daylight. Your master is both mentor and drill sergeant. Arrive late? That's extra chores. Complain about sore feet? That's 2 more hours sweeping. Smile too much? Clearly, you're plotting something. Apprenticeship isn't just about learning a trade. It's about perfecting the art of silent suffering. Every job comes with rules, and not just about how to make shoes or brew ale. There are rules about how you dress, simple, clean, and never more expensive than your master's. How you speak, respectfully, preferably with fewer vowels if you're an apprentice. And even how you walk, no skipping, no swagger, and under no circumstances should you dance in public. There are also endless, elaborate rituals, annual feasts, inspection days, and parades, where everyone tries not to trip over their own ceremonial apron. Tea breaks are less official and more creative interpretation of workplace safety. There isn't much actual tea yet. Tudor England is still decades away from that particular obsession, but breaks for bread, ale, or just staring longingly out the window are essential to the medieval workday. The master might act grumpy, but he knows productivity goes up when the apprentices aren't passed out from hunger or boredom. There's always at least one apprentice whose main job is to fetch food and gossip from the nearest market. This is how workplace drama gets delivered: cold, slightly stale, and with a side of rumours about the miller's new apprentice. The guild keeps a close watch on quality. Produce a shoddy batch of boots or an oddly shaped jug, and your master gets fined, and you get a lecture about bringing shame to the craft, and possibly a thrown wooden spoon for emphasis. Competition between guilds is fierce. Bakers, butchers, candlemakers, and fishmongers all jostle for customers and status, sometimes engaging in light industrial espionage. Translation: peeking over the fence and stealing the neighbour's best pie recipe. Promotion to journeyman is a big step, allowing you to travel and work for other masters. Journeyman means day worker, someone paid by the day, who wanders from town to town, collecting skills, experience, and an ever-growing pile of grudges against every unfair master he's ever met. If you're really skilled and sufficiently well-connected, you can submit your masterpiece to the guild, a shoe, a jug, a particularly sharp chisel, and pray they judge you worthy of joining the elite ranks. Mess it up, and you're back to fetching ale and keeping your dreams to yourself. Meanwhile, workplace safety is a matter of don't lose your fingers and try not to catch fire. There are no inspectors except the master's wife, who has zero patience for bandaged apprentices cluttering up her kitchen. Overtime isn't a paid bonus. It's what happens when a big order comes in, or when the guild needs extra hands for the annual "Why Are We Doing This Again" parade. So, next time you complain about office politics or pointless meetings, remember, in Tudor England you needed guild permission to sneeze, apprentices were punished for enthusiasm, and the only thing longer than the workday was the list of things you weren't allowed to do. Take a break. You've earned it. Just make sure the guild doesn't find out. Like to dance? That'll be 1 shilling, please. Maypole dances and other festivities were tightly regulated, and breaking curfew after a party was a fast track to the stocks, or a stern talking to from your grandmother. You might imagine Tudor merrymaking as a riot of colour and sound, lutes strumming, ribbons flying, tankards sloshing, and peasants linking arms around the maypole. That's not entirely wrong, but every step, skip, and jig is overseen by a committee of anxious town elders, a few stern-faced churchwardens, and at least one professional grump whose job is to remind everyone about proper decorum. Want to dance? Fill out the right forms? Want to host a feast? Hope you've got a permit, a sober witness, and at least 3 pies that have passed inspection. Public dancing wasn't just frowned upon without permission, it was literally illegal in many places, unless the town council or the church granted special dispensation. Maypole dancing was sometimes banned outright, seen as dangerously pagan or, at the very least, an irresistible invitation to drink, flirt, and worst of all, stay up past curfew. If your village did allow a maypole, the pole itself was guarded like the crown jewels. Lose it to thieves or pranksters from a rival village, and you'd have to explain yourself to the mayor, the vicar, and every disappointed child in a 5-mile radius. Even private parties were subject to scrutiny. Weddings, harvest festivals, and saints' days brought out the dance in everyone, but always within the boundaries of the law. The ale conner might show up to inspect the drink. The Lord of Misrule, appointed to oversee Christmas fun, was expected to keep festivities from spiralling into actual misrule. And heaven help you, if anyone caught you Morris dancing without authorization, the bells, ribbons, and face paint alone could get you a stern warning for unlicensed revelry. Curfew, as always, lurked in the background. Dancing after dark? Now you're in real danger. The town crier's bell was the musical cue that the party was over. Anyone still skipping through the streets after sunset risked a fine or a night in the stocks, where your dance partners could come by and throw cabbages, both for amusement and, frankly, as leftovers from the party. The stocks were strategically located in the most public places, ensuring your humiliation was both thorough and memorable. Of course, the church had opinions. Certain forms of dance, especially anything with enthusiastic hand-holding or suspicious hip movement, were seen as the devil's work. Priests preached stern sermons about the dangers of rhythmic movement, and for a while, even clapping on holy days was officially discouraged. Yet, humans being humans, nothing could fully suppress the urge to stomp a foot or twirl a partner. Secret dances cropped up in barns, backyards, and anywhere someone could keep a lookout for the local beadle. The price of merrymaking wasn't just legal. Festivities required a shilling here, a license there, and a discreet bribe to the village constable if things went on a bit too long. Sometimes, all it took to shut a party down was a well-timed complaint from that neighbour who still hadn't forgiven you for last year's accidental maypole theft. Yet for all the rules and risks, the Tudors kept dancing. Merrymaking was their way of thumbing their noses at winter, work, and the endless grind of rules. Feasts, games, and song brought the community together, sometimes in joyful harmony, sometimes in the communal shame of a collective hangover. So, the next time you step onto a dance floor or throw a house party, just remember, you could be fined for unlicensed merriment, shamed for illegal twirling, and publicly scolded for after-hours revelry. And if your grandmother's watching, the consequences could be even worse. In Tudor England, dancing was always a little bit dangerous, but that's what made it worth doing. Ever wanted to shake the Queen's hand? Bad idea. Approaching royalty was a minefield of rules, from where to stand to how many times you could blink. Getting it wrong could mean exile, imprisonment, or just a lifetime of embarrassment. Let's set the scene. You've been summoned to court, or perhaps you've simply wandered a bit too close to the Queen's processional. Your heart is pounding, your palms are sweating, and you suddenly become acutely aware of just how much you don't know about proper bowing technique. Welcome to the terrifying world of Tudor royal etiquette, where every movement could be scrutinized by dozens of beady-eyed courtiers, and if you mess up, the best you can hope for is to be quietly ignored for the rest of your life. First, the basics. You never, ever approach the monarch unless invited. If you see Her Majesty Elizabeth I heading your way, you stop, step aside, and execute a bow or curtsy so deep it risks becoming a yoga pose. Eye contact is reserved for the bold or the doomed, and under no circumstances should you ever attempt a handshake. Even accidental brushings of the royal sleeve could land you in deep water, preferably not the Thames, though history suggests it was always a possibility. But even before you're within hailing distance, there's the matter of dress. Are you wearing the right colours? The Queen has opinions. Sumptuary laws dictate who can wear what, but get it wrong at court, and you're not just making a fashion faux pas, you're making a political statement. Too much velvet? Who do you think you are, the Duke of Norfolk? Too little? Is this person even clean? The safest bet is to look humble, look neat, and try not to trip on your own laces. Next, consider the choreography. There's a protocol for how close you can stand. 3 paces for nobility, further for commoners, and absolutely nowhere for that guy who once sneezed during a royal audience. Even your breathing should be regulated, quiet, shallow, and absolutely odorless. Tudor court was a place of heavy perfumes and even heavier anxiety. If you're actually granted an audience, you'll be briefed on everything from how to address the monarch, Your Majesty, followed by as many flourishes as you can manage without fainting, to how to leave the room, always backward, never turning your back, which made for some truly memorable courtly pile-ups. Forget to bow on the way out? Expect to be talked about for years, possibly in the next pamphlet of royal gossip. Touching the Queen, or even her robes, was strictly forbidden unless you were a chosen favourite, or a physician called in for the ritual known as the royal touch. This was an actual ceremony, believed to cure scrofula, the king's evil, by the laying on of royal hands. For the afflicted, it was a miracle. For everyone else, it was an excellent reminder that even illnesses were opportunities for complicated ceremony and awkward physical proximity. For the average subject, the closest you'd get to the royal presence was at a public procession or during touching for the king's evil. If you accidentally sneezed, coughed, or fainted from excitement, you'd best hope no one noticed, or you'd spend the rest of your life as that guy who ruined the Queen's big day. Whole careers were made and ended on the success or failure of a single bow. Then there were the unwritten rules. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't ask questions, especially about the royal hair. And absolutely never mention marriage unless you're prepared for a 30-minute lecture or, in the case of Henry VIII, sudden and dramatic career changes. So, next time you meet a celebrity and can barely manage a selfie, remember that in Tudor England, proximity to the crown was more dangerous than treason, and the rules changed faster than you could blink, just hopefully not more than the allowed number of times. Bow, smile, and retreat carefully, because when it comes to the royal touch, a little distance goes a long way. The Tudors loved their beer, but hated their beer watered down. There were actual ale tasters whose job was to sample your brew and fine you if it was found wanting. Get caught cheating the foam, and your social life is over. Let's begin with the most important rule of Tudor hospitality. Never trust a beer that looks suspiciously clear. Ale was the drink of the people, rich or poor, child or grandmother. Water was mostly for washing or, in emergencies, for putting out fires, assuming you wanted to risk it. But ale was sacred. Brewed in homes, taverns, and monasteries, it was the safest way to hydrate and the social glue holding the entire country together. It was also highly regulated, because if there was one thing a Tudor wouldn't tolerate, it was weak booze. Enter the ale taster, a highly respected and mildly feared figure in every town. Part quality control, part party crasher, part local celebrity. His job: show up, unannounced, at any alehouse, home or brewery and demand a taste. No one refused the ale taster unless they were angling for trouble or in possession of a suspicious barrel marked special reserve for the pigs. The ale taster would lift his wooden cup, sniff, swirl, with great ceremony, sip, and make a pronouncement that could determine the fate of your next month's business and your reputation for years. And the rules were strict. The price of ale was set by law and measured by the assize of bread and ale, a legal document thicker than a good mug of stout. Brewers caught watering down their beer, skimping on ingredients, or sneaking in anything foreign, like a handful of mashed peas, the horror faced stiff fines. Repeat offenders could be banned from selling ale, or even shamed by being forced to drink their own substandard brew in public. You haven't known humiliation until you've gulped down your own watery mistake while your neighbours pretend not to laugh. And it wasn't just beer. All foods in the marketplace were fair game for Tudor regulation. Butter stretched with suet, bread bulked out with chalk or sawdust, wine with a suspicious aftertaste of vinegar. It all fell under the watchful eye of the food inspectors. Cheese, especially, was a notorious culprit. Cut a round of cheddar and find more straw than dairy. The cheese taster, yes, there was a cheese taster, would descend upon your stall, wielding a special knife and the wrath of the dairy gods. But back to ale, because that's where things got personal. Good ale could make your tavern the heart of the village. Bad ale? You might as well hang a sign that reads lonely forever. If word got out that your beer was thin, flat, or failed to inspire the appropriate level of village song, you were in real trouble. Nothing spread faster than the rumour of a disappointing pint. For Tudor women, many of whom brewed ale for their families or as a sideline business, the stakes were high. Women brewers, known as alewives, were sometimes treated with suspicion, especially if their beer was too good witchcraft or too bad scandal. An alewife's success depended on her secret recipe, her skill at sweet-talking the ale taster, and her ability to dodge accusations of watering down the goods on a rainy day. Punishments for food fraud ranged from fines and shaming to the pillory. More than one brewer found themselves locked in the stocks, forced to listen as passers-by critiqued their product and offered helpful recipes. Next time, try hops and less pond water. So, next time you complain about flat beer or stale bread, remember, in Tudor England, food and drink were a matter of public honour. Inspectors roamed the streets. Your neighbours were always watching, and one watered-down ale could ruin your social life faster than you could say cheers. Drink up. Just make sure there's an ale taster watching your back. The Tudors loved a good, weird punishment. Stocks, pillories, and public humiliation were only the beginning. There are records of people being pelted with cabbages for particularly creative crimes. Good luck if your crime is being from the next village. Step into any Tudor town square and you're bound to see justice in action, or at least the medieval version of it, where creativity and humiliation are valued just as much as deterrence. The stocks were a classic, 2 wooden planks with holes for your ankles and wrists, planted in the muddiest, most public place in town. Find yourself stuck there and you could look forward to a parade of neighbours offering moral instruction, old jokes and whatever produce they had handy. Cabbages were a favourite, cheap, heavy and satisfyingly squishy by midday. A well-aimed cabbage to the shins was a badge of honour for local kids. Pillories took things a step further. Instead of just sitting around, you stood with your head and hands trapped, forced to endure the elements and the merciless banter of passing merchants. People would come from miles away to see who was on display that week, and some towns even scheduled market days to coincide with public punishments, just to boost attendance. It was a family affair. Bring the kids, buy a pie, pelt your neighbour with yesterday's vegetables. Not all punishments were so hands-on. For lesser offences, like grumbling about the church roof or selling short-weight bread, you might be sentenced to wear a sign describing your crime: turnip cheat, gossip. Pie offenderous parade around the village until your shame was sufficiently public. Some especially unlucky souls were made to stand barefoot in the church porch, wearing only a shift and their regrets, while the parishioners filed past with pointed stares and helpful reminders about piety. And then there were the creative punishments. The cucking stool, or ducking stool, was reserved for scolds and so-called troublesome women, essentially anyone who talked back or refused to laugh at the bailiff's jokes. Offenders were strapped to a wooden chair and dunked into the nearest pond, emerging wetter, colder, and, presumably, chastened. Spectators cheered, bets were placed on how many dunks it would take to cool someone's temper, and the local eel population enjoyed a sudden influx of visitors. If you thought the Tudors were above playground-style justice, think again. Being from the wrong village could earn you a healthy helping of cabbage-based justice, especially at fairs or festivals where rival towns met. There are records of entire families pelted with turnips, onions, and the odd beetroot simply for winning too many prizes in the sack race, or having the audacity to own a prize cow. Serious crimes called for serious consequences. Thieves might lose an ear, poachers could be branded, and repeat offenders faced banishment. But for most everyday misdeeds, the goal wasn't just punishment, it was public correction. The theory was that a little embarrassment now would save the village trouble later. Whether it worked is debatable, but at least everyone got a chance to clear out the larder. For some, punishment was almost a social event, a chance to air grievances, settle scores, and test one's throwing arm. For others, it was a cautionary tale. Behave, or the cabbage could be aimed at you next. There's something deeply human about a community coming together, not just to judge, but to participate in the spectacle of penance. After all, why waste a perfectly good cabbage on soup when it could be launched at your neighbour's pride? So, next time you make a mistake, take comfort. At least your worst punishment is a passive-aggressive email or a grumpy review online. In Tudor England, the only thing thicker than the justice was the soup, and both were best served with a side of humble pie and maybe a flying cabbage. Special rules kicked in for holidays and festivals. Sometimes it was illegal not to party, other times you could be fined for singing too loudly after dark. The calendar was one long test of your ability to keep up with changing laws. Welcome to the Tudor year, where every month brings a new decree and a fresh opportunity to accidentally break the law. On Midsummer's Eve, for example, you're required by local ordinance to join your neighbours and parade around a bonfire, because nothing says public safety like setting fire to a giant pile of wood while half the village is already tipsy. Fail to show up? That's a fine for you, and a reputation for being either a witch, a Puritan, or, worst of all, no fun at all. But don't get too comfortable in your revels. After a certain hour, the merrymaking must be dialed back. Singing, dancing, or excessive maypole enthusiasm after curfew will land you in trouble with the parish constable, who takes his job as inspector of noise very seriously. There are actual laws about when you can bang a drum, who can ring a bell, and how many verses of Greensleeves are too many. The answer, according to one exasperated mayor, is 2. Christmas is another minefield. For 12 days, feasting, games, and even a little bit of gentle gambling are encouraged, but only in the right proportions. Eat too little, and you're suspected of secret fasting. See the laws of Lent. Eat too much, and you're called before the local magistrate for gluttony or, worse, for immodest pudding consumption. The Lord of Misrule, chosen to preside over the Christmas festivities, is technically in charge. But the local vicar is always close by, just waiting to call time on the fun if things get out of hand. Translation: if anyone starts singing bawdy songs before the third cup of ale, harvest festivals are a legal tightrope. Villagers are obligated to bring in the crops, celebrate the bounty, and offer thanks, but no unruly behaviour, please. There's always a new proclamation about which games are allowed, how many apple carts can be raced down the hill, and whether or not last year's incident with the runaway sheep will be repeated. Spoiler, it usually is. Even birthdays, weddings, and saints' days are watched with an eagle eye. Want to throw a party for your youngest? Make sure you haven't scheduled it on a minor saint's feast or during the week of a major fasting day. One misstep, and you'll have the church warden at your door asking pointed questions about your cake recipe and whether or not you prayed before the dancing started. And for every must-celebrate event, there's a corresponding rule for must-abstain. Some days, it's illegal to work, to eat meat, or to sing secular songs. On others, it's mandatory to hang greenery over your doorway or risk a visit from the town busybody. The Tudors were experts at keeping records of who did what, when, and with whom, which, come to think of it, is a tradition still alive in small towns everywhere. For the truly unlucky, seasonal rules can overlap. Imagine being caught skipping church on Easter because you stayed up too late at the midsummer fire, only to be fined for missing both the holy day and the curfew. Your only defence is to plead confusion, which is the Tudor version of my calendar app didn't update. Through it all, the people of Tudor England persisted, singing, feasting, occasionally bickering, but always showing up when the law required. Because in this world, the only thing worse than too much fun was not enough. So next time your neighbour invites you to a party, remember, in the Tudor calendar, celebration is a civic duty, and your attendance might just keep you out of trouble or land you in it, depending on the hour. Cheers to midsummer, mayhem, and the never-ending dance of rules. It was not just what you did, but what people said you did. Tudor justice often relied on rumour, reputation, and how convincingly you could deny everything with a straight face. If the village gossip took a dislike to you, expect trouble. Picture yourself in a small Tudor village where everyone knows everyone and, more importantly, knows everyone else's business. There are no secrets here, only stories waiting to grow legs and sprint across the parish. The village gossip is not just a person but a public institution, armed with an invisible badge and a mouth that never tires. Her weapon of choice? The loaded question, did you hear about Thomas and the vicar's goose? Suddenly you're on trial for poultry larceny and you haven't even left your house yet. The legal system, for all its statutes and fines, works hand in hand with the informal court of public opinion. The local constable might keep records, but the real files are kept in the minds of the old women by the well and the men who gather at the smithy. A single rumour can send someone to the pillory, or at the very least have the church warden knocking at your door with concerns. Don't think you can hide behind logic or evidence. In Tudor England, the truth is flexible, like the eels in the river or the mare's hairline. It's all about who tells the best story and who believes it first. If you're accused of watering down ale, the rumour alone is enough to thin out your business faster than the strongest hops. If your neighbour insists you were seen sneaking around the henhouse at midnight, expect suspicious glances for a month and the occasional surprise egg in your shoe. Women are especially vulnerable to this kind of justice. The scold's bridle, a metal cage fitted over the mouth, was reserved for those accused of gossiping too much or, ironically, complaining about gossip. Of course, the men who started rumours rarely saw such inventive punishment. Instead, they just received the satisfaction of knowing they'd successfully ruined someone's week with nothing but a whisper and a nudge. Sometimes the village gossip is helpful. A warning about bad cheese, a heads up that the ale taster is on his way, or a reminder that the turnip inspector is allergic to turnips. But more often, it's the source of your latest headache. Accusations of witchcraft start with a bad harvest and a neighbour's offhand comment about your suspiciously healthy cabbages. Disputes over property lines or borrowed tools quickly escalate when fueled by a steady supply of backfence commentary. The church, of course, has a stake in all this. Public penance is as much about appeasing the local grapevine as it is about justice. If you confess your sins on Sunday, it's not just for forgiveness, it's to make sure everyone hears your side of the story before Mrs. Parsons spins it into a 3-part saga featuring goats, an illicit pie, and the mayor's missing socks. Surviving this environment takes skill. The best defense is to cultivate your own network of counter-gossips, friends, relatives, and at least one helpful child who can relay what's being whispered at the well. A few timely acts of charity, helping the elderly with their firewood, sharing your best onions, or simply not being too successful, can help shield you from the worst of the rumour mill. Yet, for all its flaws, toothless justice is a system everyone understands. It's unpredictable, exhausting, and almost impossible to avoid. But it does keep people in line. After all, your reputation is your most valuable asset. Lose it, and you might as well move to the next village and start over. And even then, the gossip will probably get there before you do. So next time you worry about office politics or neighbourhood chatter, be grateful. At least you don't need to fear the scold's bridle, or an entire town convinced you're secretly turning butter with the devil's help. In Tudor England, justice wasn't just blind, it was nosy, relentless, and really good at remembering the worst things about you. Not even death got you off the hook. If your will wasn't in order, or you died owing a fine, your corpse could be denied burial, or worse, your family fined double. Congratulations. The paperwork follows you into the afterlife. Let's say you've survived decades of Tudor life, braved Lent, dodged the pie inspectors, paid your beard tax, and kept on the right side of the turnip inspector. At last, you shuffle off this mortal coil, ready for a well-earned rest. Not so fast. The legal hurdles are only just beginning. In Tudor England, dying was a bureaucratic event. If you hadn't already written a will, expect the church, the crown, and at least 3 relatives you haven't seen since the last plague outbreak to descend on your house like crows at a harvest. Wills were not a luxury. They were a civic duty. The law expected every householder, man or woman, rich or poor, to have a will tucked away, preferably somewhere that wouldn't be mistaken for kindling. Failing to leave instructions for your possessions could mean chaos for your family. Who gets your good shoes? What about the pewter tankard, the sheep, the leftover candle stubs? The court would decide for you, and rest assured, their ideas about fair distribution often ended with the local bailiff acquiring your best onions. But even the best-laid wills were not safe from trouble. The church expected a mortuary fee, a special payment for the privilege of being buried in consecrated ground. Can't pay? Then your body might linger, unburied, on the edge of the churchyard until someone coughed up the required amount. In some towns, a sign was actually hung on your door. Funeral delayed, insufficient funds. Neighbours would walk by, shake their heads, and mutter about the perils of poor planning. If you happened to die in debt, things got more complicated. Your unpaid fines and bills passed directly to your loved ones. Children, siblings, even distant cousins could receive a cheerful visit from the local reeve demanding payment. Tudor collectors were tireless. Convinced that nothing promoted family togetherness like the shared burden of an ancestor's debt. Fines could be doubled for the inconvenience, and if your family was unable to pay, your remaining possessions might be seized and sold at public auction, often to the very neighbour who accused you of cheating at dice last Michaelmas. Then there was the posthumous shaming. If you'd managed to upset the church, failed to pay tithes, or left behind any unresolved disputes, your family could be ordered to do public penance on your behalf. This could mean standing in church in a special mourning smock, confessing your loved one's failings, and promising never to let such a thing happen again. Nothing says rest in peace like your children apologizing for your outstanding cheese tax while the whole village watches. And don't forget the paperwork. Probate courts processed thousands of wills. each with its own peculiarities and opportunities for mischief. Disputes erupted over the tiniest bequests. To my second cousin Anne, I leave my second-best spoon, with rival claimants emerging from the woodwork like moths to a flame. If your will was unclear, your family could be locked in legal combat for months, all while the parish clerk charged for every stamped copy, every lost sheep, and every official sigh of exasperation. Some Tudors tried to get clever, hiding assets, leaving coded messages, or naming their pet goose as executor. But the law was usually one step ahead, and stories abound of clever bequests unravelling before the ink was dry. In the end, the only certainty was that death offered no escape from the Tudor obsession with order and documentation. So next time you groan about modern bureaucracy, remember, in Tudor England, you could be fined after your funeral, shamed by your children, and upstaged by your own will. The paperwork, quite literally, never ends. Think your snapback is controversial? In Tudor England, the wrong hat could get you fined, shamed, or accused of impersonating the gentry. There were laws dictating who could wear what on their head, right down to the feathers. Show up at church in a hat too fancy for your station, and suddenly you're the lead suspect in a scandal involving social mobility and one very angry parish priest. Let's step into the bustling world of Tudor millinery, a universe where hats are more than mere accessories. They're legal evidence, status symbols, and, occasionally, the main event at the local scandal. Every morning, putting on your hat is a strategic act. Are you a labourer, allowed only the simplest felt cap, or a merchant, permitted a bit of colour but nothing resembling silk? If you're a noble, the world is your haberdashery oyster, with velvets, feathers and jewels piled high. Everyone else must play by the rules, or risk a legal fashion faux pas. The sumptuary laws are everywhere, and hats are one of their most visible and viciously enforced features. These statutes exist to keep everyone in their social lane. Only those with the right income or lineage may don certain materials, trims, or colours. A farmer with a feathered cap? Outrageous. A tailor's apprentice seen in a velvet bonnet? Expect a visit from the sumptuary inspector, a man whose main qualification is the ability to sniff out forbidden millinery at 50 paces. Feathers, in particular, are a minefield. Swan's feathers for the lords, cock's feathers for gentlemen, and, if you're truly unfortunate, goose feathers for everyone else. And don't even dream of ostrich plumes unless you want to be accused of planning a coup. The wrong feather on your hat is a fast track to the church porch for a public telling off, and possibly a fine that stings more than the plume itself. It gets even more complicated at special events. Church services, holidays, and court appearances all have their own hat codes. Show up underdressed and you'll be mistaken for a pauper. Overdo it and suddenly you're aspiring above your station, which is the Tudor equivalent of wearing sunglasses indoors, bold, offensive, and guaranteed to provoke outrage. The parish priest, who is supposed to care about your soul, now cares deeply about your headwear. He might even work your hat into the Sunday sermon. Woe to those who wear velvet bonnets without a proper blessing. For women, hats and hoods are an entire legal category. The length of your veil, the colour of your coif, the shape of your headdress, each detail is a coded signal to the world. Unmarried? Modest cap. Married? You may indulge in a touch of lace. A widow? Back to basics. If you are caught borrowing your neighbour's French hood for a quick trip to the market, expect her to notice and the gossip to follow you home before you've even finished shopping. Enforcement is creative and, as always, public. Get caught in an illegal hat and you might be forced to parade through town wearing your offending headgear pinned with a note-reading pretender, or, for the especially bold, a full set of kitchen utensils to signal you've confused your status with your stew pot. Repeat offenders could face larger fines, or worse, be banned from market day until they can prove they own a perfectly legal cap. The laws were meant to prevent social climbing and keep order, but in practice, they created an underground world of hat smuggling, discreet milliners, and late-night swaps between ambitious townsfolk. Where there's a will, and a hat with extra ribbon, there's a way. So, next time you worry about dress codes, remember the Tudors, a world where your choice of hat could get you in more trouble than a tax evader or a rogue turnip. Wear it well, but wear it wisely. Because in Tudor England, your head was only as safe as your hat was legal. Fancy growing a few turnips behind your cottage? Better check with the local bailiff. In Tudor times, even your humble vegetable patch was subject to royal oversight. Certain plants were forbidden, others reserved for the rich, and one wrong pumpkin could get your garden inspected, which is just a polite way of saying trampled by goats owned by someone important. It's sunrise, and you're outside, clutching a hoe, dreaming of a simple life. But before you so much as plant a cabbage, you're glancing over your shoulder for the bailiff, the reeve, or the occasional passing vegetable inspector. Yes, that was an actual job. The Tudors had rules for everything, and gardening was no exception. Not even the privacy of your backyard was safe from regulation. Grow the wrong thing, and you might as well be cultivating dissent. First, the list of forbidden flora. Some plants, like saffron, were so valuable that only the wealthy or well-connected could legally grow them. Saffron patches were registered, watched, and occasionally raided in the name of the crown. Woad, the infamous blue dye plant, was restricted because the authorities didn't want ordinary folks running around looking like minor royalty, or worse, like Welshmen during festival season. Certain fruit trees were reserved for the manor houses. If your apple tree produced anything too sweet, expect a visit from a fruit reeve with suspiciously large pockets. Even ordinary vegetables came with strings attached. Asparagus was considered a luxury, lettuce a status symbol, and peas. Well, peas were acceptable, as long as you didn't grow too many and accidentally start your own green revolution. The best onions and leeks were snapped up by the gentry, leaving the rest of us with suspiciously small bulbs and the faint hope of a good trade come market day. The main threat to your plot, however, was not the weather or pests. It was inspection. Official garden reviews happened whenever the local lord was bored or the Queen was rumoured to be travelling through the area. The inspectors, usually a mix of minor officials, nosy neighbours, and that one goat, would sweep through, counting cabbages, checking for forbidden plants, and quietly helping themselves to anything particularly impressive. Complaining about this was pointless. The law, after all, was on their side, and the goats could not be reasoned with. Tudor gardening was also about surveillance. Neighbours kept a close eye on each other's patches, partly out of jealousy, and partly because there were fines for failing to report an illegal gourd. Imagine your shock when a pumpkin you grew for the church harvest festival gets you summoned to the manor, accused of excessive squashing. You're forced to explain your horticultural ambitions while the bailiff measures your turnips for evidence of social climbing. Composting, crop rotation, and other advanced gardening tricks could arouse suspicion. Too much productivity was seen as a sign that you had extra time and money, a dangerous combination in a society obsessed with knowing everyone's place. If you produced more than your neighbours, expect whispered rumours about magical beans, or even worse, accusations of sorcery. Witches, it was said, always had the best gardens. Just ask anyone who found their parsley patch a little too lively. If you wanted to expand, you'd need official permission, more paperwork than a small estate, and of course, a gift or two for the local official. A basket of carrots went a long way, as did a promise not to outgrow his radishes next season. Crop theft was rampant, but prosecuting a case meant navigating a labyrinth of feudal law, property rights, and sworn testimony from 3 neighbours and a slightly confused cow. So next time you're planting tomatoes or admiring your marrows, remember the Tudors, a world where the Queen herself could, in theory, claim your onions, and where the only thing more regulated than your garden was your hat. Keep your rows neat, your paperwork handy, and your pumpkins out of sight. Because in Tudor England, even your vegetables had to know their place. Children weren't just miniature adults. They came with their own set of rules. From the age you were allowed to work, to what games you could play and which songs were banned at May Day, the Tudor state had big opinions about little people. Try playing leapfrog on a Sunday, and you might end up with a visit from the local moral enforcer and a sermon you can't nap through. Life as a Tudor child was a complicated affair. Forget about running wild and free. The minute you could walk, you could work, and everyone from your parents to the village bailiff had something to say about it. There were rules about who could herd geese, who was allowed to help in the fields, and, critically, how much mischief you could get up to before someone fetched the switch. By the time you were 7, you were officially considered old enough for light labor, which usually meant jobs no adult wanted, such as chasing crows, scaring cats off the bakery roof, and collecting manure with a cheerful bucket and a grim expression. School, for those lucky enough to attend, was another world of rules. Lessons ran from sunrise to sunset, interrupted only by chores, church, and the occasional plague. Schoolmasters took their job as shapers of young minds very seriously, and so did their birch rods. Woe betide the child who spelled goose with a Z, or doodled in the margins. Both were likely to earn you extra practice and a sore bottom. The curriculum was heavy on Bible verses and moral tales, with a healthy dash of Latin, arithmetic, and advice on how not to become a vagabond. Playtime, when it arrived, was both a blessing and a legal negotiation. Certain games were encouraged, hopscotch, tag, and anything involving running in circles until you collapsed. Others, however, were strictly forbidden by local custom or actual law. Leapfrog, for reasons still mysterious, was seen as dangerously exuberant on Sundays. Ball games risked breaking church windows, and singing certain songs was believed to encourage laziness or, worse, spontaneous dancing. If you wanted to blow off steam, you'd better stick to the officially approved games, and even then, be ready for a scolding if your laughter got too loud. Then there were the holidays, when children could finally let loose, but not too much. May Day, with its ribbons, flowers, and songs, was watched over by a small army of adults making sure no one recited the wrong lyrics or lost their shoes in the maypole stampede. At Christmastide, children performed in mummers' plays, but only after their lines were vetted for accidental blasphemy and unlicensed jokes about the local lord. Jobs for children came with their own elaborate hierarchy. The eldest son might be sent to apprentice with a blacksmith. Younger children found work wherever they could, carrying water, selling wares at market, or acting as official bird scarers. Girls were put to spinning, sewing, or helping in the kitchen, and if they were especially unlucky, tasked with cleaning out the chamber pot before school. All these jobs came with rules, from proper dress to approved language. Swear too loudly while scrubbing potatoes, and the village gossip might report you to the priest. Most of all, children were expected to show respect toward adults, the church, and, most crucially, the endless parade of rules. Even fun was regulated, with parish constables peeking over hedges to catch riotous behaviour. The dream of sneaking off to fish or picking forbidden berries was always tempered by the fear of being caught and sentenced to a week of peeling turnips as penance. Yet for all the rules, Tudor children found ways to play, laugh, and break a few regulations when no one was looking. Childhood, as always, was about pushing boundaries, preferably without getting caught. So next time you see a kid climbing a fence or singing at the top of their lungs, remember the Tudors, a time when every leap, laugh, and lullaby needed legal approval and sometimes a really good excuse. Dreaming of a house with lots of light? That'll cost you. Tudor England imposed taxes on windows, which led to some creative and freezing architectural decisions. Whole neighbourhoods ended up living in the dark just to avoid an extra penny, and if you tried to cheat the system with a ventilation hole, you risked both a fine and lifelong vitamin D deficiency. Imagine moving into your dream cottage, wattle and daub walls, a thatched roof, and, in your imagination, beautiful sunlight pouring through spacious glass windows. Then, reality sets in. The local tax collector is circling, abacus in hand, peering up at your house and counting every opening. That tiny slit by the chimney? That's a window. The drafty gap in your bedroom wall? Window. The decorative hole you claim is just for letting the house breathe? Definitely a window, and double if the bailiff's having a bad day. The law was simple. More windows meant more taxes. Officially, it was a way to fund public works and royal projects. Unofficially, it was a war on comfort and natural light. The result? A Tudor landscape dotted with gloomy cottages, awkward brick patches where windows used to be, and residents squinting like moles at high noon. Whole towns developed a look. Small, poky openings set high above eye level, as if the houses were built for giants, or people with an intense fear of sunlight. Builders, never ones to accept defeat, grew creative. They introduced blind windows, faux openings bricked up or painted to look like real ones from a distance, fooling only the most inattentive tacksman. Ventilation holes disguised as ornamental features became the rage, though they rarely worked as intended. For every tax dodged, there was an equal and opposite draft, whistling through the house like a vengeful ghost. Insulation was still centuries away, so you either paid for light or paid for extra blankets, which were also taxed, but that's another rant. The consequences of this innovation were as predictable as they were miserable. The less light you let in, the colder and gloomier your house became. In winter, the average Tudor home was somewhere between root cellar and crypt chic. Vitamin D deficiencies weren't just common. They were the subject of folk remedies, with people being told to stand outside at midday, face the sun, and try not to look too happy. That also drew suspicion. Meanwhile, families did everything by candlelight, which meant more smoke, more risk of fire, and, of course, more opportunities for the tax collector to note that your ventilation hole now looked suspiciously like a window from the outside. Of course, cheating the system was always risky. Tax inspectors were not just relentless, they were vindictive. If you were caught, the fines could bankrupt a household. Local legend told of a baker's wife who bricked up her windows each spring and smashed them out again, come autumn, a seasonal performance that ended when the inspector fell into her goose pond and taxed her for the view. And then there were the unintended side effects. Marriages ended over window arguments. You said we could have two. Night. Children developed night vision, and local artists despaired at ever capturing a decent portrait without someone's face half lost in shadow. If you dared to install real glass, you'd better hope you could defend your decision to every neighbour, visitor, and passing stranger with a tax badge. Yet, like all things Tudor, the window tax was endured with grumbling creativity and a little communal humour. Neighbours swapped tips on draft artistry, the best places to nap in a sunbeam, if you could find one, and how to use a single window to light an entire room by standing everyone in a line. So next time you open your curtains and flood your home with light, remember the Tudors, a people so dedicated to avoiding taxes, they invented the world's darkest interiors and the draftiest jokes. If only they'd taxed damp instead, every house would have been a palace of glass. So, as you drift off tonight, just take a second to reflect on the heroic journey you've made. You survived a day under the gaze of Tudor law, where even your socks could land you in court, your beard might get taxed, and someone's actual job was to inspect your pie for illegal meat content. You navigated the dinner table's etiquette like a ninja, avoided the wrath of the turnip inspector, and managed not to insult anyone's hat, at least not out loud. You dodged curfews, candle taxes, gossip, and the world's most judgmental sumptuary police. And somehow, you did it all without a single flush toilet, TikTok tutorial, or recourse to just Googling it. That, my friend, is resilience. The Tudors had to tiptoe through an obstacle course of rules, customs, and penalties, big and small, weird and weirder, while still making time to live, laugh, love, and occasionally survive Lent. Their lives were messy, noisy, pungent, and perilous. Yet they built communities, raised families, and clung to joy wherever they could find it, sometimes even in a well-aimed cabbage. So tonight, As you tuck into your clean bed with your modern pajamas, running water, and the luxury of reading after dark, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to the people who came before us. The ones who endured lice, leeches, window taxes, and the ever-present threat of pie inspection, all so that, centuries later, you could enjoy the simple comfort of socks that match and snacks that are mostly legal. Because history may be gross and terrifying, but it's also proof that people are stubborn, hopeful, and, let's be honest, kind of ridiculous. Sleep well, and remember, whatever tomorrow throws at you, at least it won't be a public cabbage. Good night.